After seeing the strategy game announcements at Gamescom, Paradox said, "Hold my beer." It came with a huge announcement for Victoria 3, including its release date of the 25th of October 2022, one day after my birthday, some 12 years after the release of Victoria 2. In this video, we'll actually take a look not just at the cinematic trailer that I'm playing through here in the introduction, but also some gameplay footage as well. They shared a whole load on their channel, so shout out to them if you want to go and see a 4-hour live stream. They've posted a VOD there too. We'll also talk a little bit about Hearts of Iron 4 and CK3 toward the end of the video, but primarily here, this is all about Victoria 3. It's about what we now know about the game, how it will play, so basically everything you need to know about Victoria 3, and also some initial impressions that have come from people who have spent quite a lot of time with the game, from reviewers from IGN to random people to content creators. I've sort of tried to canvass the field and get a feel for how Victoria 3 is shaping up ahead of this very exciting release date next month, the 25th of October. Without any further ado, let's jump in and talk Victoria 3. So, the everything that you need to know is as follows. Victoria 3 is a really grand strategy, complex and complicated strategy game coming out of Paradox. It's set between 1836 and 1936. Of course, the Victorian age. And as you can see from this beautifully looking work in progress, but real in-game footage, it's actually a fairly exciting and graphically advanced world for a Paradox grand strategy game anyway. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. What we need to know about how it plays is it is essentially focused on 3 core gameplay features. Here you're seeing a technology tree. This is part of the broader societal feature in the game. Not only do we have, of course, a tech tree with research, but we also have a cultural advancement and a political advancement as well. A culture that is governed by our government, but also by laws, and of course by that sort of governance framework as well. Are we a monarchy? Or are we something a little more dubious or a little more democratic? It's, of course, entirely up to the nation that we're playing. And that forms part of the first tranche of Victoria 3's gameplay, the societal tranche. Secondly, we have the economy. Here you can see these livestock ranches. We're expanding our production of them. We're looking at how much we are exchanging them for, how we're working that building effectively, a little bit more on those later, and how this all plays out in a global economy and in a system that is really, of course, deeply focused on trade and logistics. Those two things domestically play out, but they also play out on a global stage as well, of course, where we have essentially the world's greatest supply and demand simulator of all time. I'm hoping anyway. Taking a look here at how it's playing out in practice with these textile mills, you can see that while it's complex, it's also front-footed in a way that's hopefully and certainly a lot more user-friendly than something like Victoria 2 and some of Paradox's previous grand strategy games. Here, of course, and as it actually plays out in the gameplay, it's about resource management too, and about how we tax those goods and the exchange of goods, whether we are exchanging them as primary goods like lumber, or whether we're spending a bit of time to convert that into a more advanced secondary or tertiary good, for example. All of this plays out in-game in basically 2 ways: buildings or resource extractors or whatever you want to call them, and then how the population or the labor force is assigned. The labor force, of course, have their own intricacies around how many of them there are, but also their happiness, their productivity, their health, that kind of thing. Everything is at play. And lastly, of course, the third system is about geopolitics. Here we know this is about pacts and alliances, threats, and of course militaries as well, which are to a certain extent a numbers game, but are a very important one at that. And this leads me through into some impressions of Victoria 3, some gameplay impressions at that. Firstly, people have noted that the game looks pretty good, especially for Paradox Grand Strategy. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I think you can see that one of the ways that this is commonly talked about is about how the map itself is not static. Geysers erupt, glaciers move, trees sway in the tropical winds, for example. It helps to build a more real world on top of all of these market features. They've also said that the UI and tooltips are very similar to CK3 and that the tutorial's pretty decent. And that the diplomacy is key, that military isn't just everything in this game, but that the overarching systems are quite well balanced, at least so far, relative to each other. And that's about all the information, the sort of deep dive information that we have on Victoria 3. Of course, the footage that you're seeing is absolutely work in progress, so I wouldn't delve too far into the individual economic policies or the health system sliders that you can see here and necessarily assume that they'll be in the final game. However, the final game, as I mentioned earlier, is releasing on the 25th of October. That's next month. So you can probably assume that the version of the game that's being played and circulated is dang near close to the final version. So on the one hand, be cautious with what you're seeing with these industries and buildings and how they play out. But on the other hand, you should probably accept that a lot of the core gameplay systems and everything that's wrapped up here in Victoria 3 and in this grand Victorian age simulator is probably pretty dang close to finished. And that is actually me finished with talking about Victoria 3. However, Paradox weren't just done there. And there are a couple of other interesting announcements that I think you might be interested in if you like Vic 3. Firstly, Hearts of Iron 4, leading forward almost exactly after Victoria 3 ends. You can slap yourself into Hearts of Iron 4 and take on this, of course, World War II era grand strategy simulator. They announced the By Blood Alone DLC, which will be releasing on September 28th, again coming up very soon, around 3 weeks away from the time of recording this video. It adds new focus trees to Italy, to Ethiopia, and to the Swiss. Very exciting overhaul there. And of course, it also adds a whole load of planes and models and unit models and soundtracks. But more importantly, it also adds some interesting peace options, like the ability to demilitarize zones on the map or claim control of resources without claiming control of the specific territories. It's another exciting addition to the Hearts of Iron 4 roster. Very excited to see how it plays out. Whether I'll have time for it, though, is another question entirely, because as well as announcing a Stellaris pack, which doesn't quite fit with the theme of this video, but I do think I'll give it an honorable mention, they've also announced a more historically aligned expansion to Crusader Kings 3. A simple one, more of an event one in line with the very first content that we saw for the game. This is called Friends and Foes. It's the very first thing that's going to be releasing, or the very first one that you'll be able to get your hands on out of the 3 discussed in this video, releasing on September 9th. It adds what they've called day-to-day player-driven events, over 100 of them for your character, stretching through things from their childhood through to wooing people in adulthood and everything else in between. They should add some more flavor and fun and storytelling to the game, which is fantastic because I'd like to personally delve into that a little more. They're also adding memories, so characters will reminisce on things, on relationships, on their childhood, good, bad, or otherwise, and many other things. It's a whole load of exciting news from Paradox. It was a fairly fast-paced video. Hopefully you caught everything. There will be time cards below if you need to bounce around different sections, and I can't wait to check out, hopefully, all of this, but at the very least, Victoria 3, when it releases next month. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.